What's going on, guys? It's Caleb here, and today I have a wonderful guest with us, Michael Oliver, founder of Natural Selling. Michael is one of the world-renowned professionals in sales and is definitely at the forefront when it comes to techniques that work with neuroscience and just a pressureless way of selling. I would call him an expert, but the more you learn about Michael, there's an old quote that he says, an expert is someone who used to be great at something, and a spurt is nothing than a trip under pressure. So Michael is definitely one of the best professionals when it comes to selling and most talented. And he's created and really pioneered a lot of the techniques that you're going to see today that are rampant, I think, within the online sales industry. Names such as Jeremy Miner, Bill Walsh, and even myself with our own methodologies of selling definitely come a lot from Michael's work that was created a while ago. And I think he flies a little bit under the radar. You can find him on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and he's got quite the story. And so I brought him on today to just share more about himself and how he got into the position where he is, but more importantly, how natural selling actually came to be. So I guess with that, Michael, where did you get your start? Where do you feel like it all began?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on board here, Caleb. That's really good. And just to give you a bit more precise, is expert is X is something that was, and the spurt is a drip under pressure. So there you've got it
Trip
now.
under pressure.
Okay. Yeah, to answer your question, well, I guess in the late 70s, I became unemployable. I'm not the person who is very corporately inclined or anything like this, and if things don't feel right for me, then I tend to voice it, and sometimes I voice it a little bit too much. So anyway, so that's kind of the fun part of it. And I discovered an ad in the Los Angeles Times, living in Santa Monica at the time, in the very late 70s, for solar energy representative. So I thought that there was a three-line ad. So I thought that would be kind of interesting. So I went to an interview and was accepted to sell solar energy. Why not? I mean, pretty much accept anyone in those days.
Right.
And so, but it was the start of just a really great career and life, and discovery of purpose as well, in as far as what I really wanted to do. And so so what happened was they took me on as an independent contractor, which meant that I wasn't paying anything. I literally had to go out and find my own leads. But
Commission
the
only.
solar manufacturer was a guy called Jerry Federico, a wonderful person, very, very talented. And he became a very close friend and mentor. And he helped me through a lot of the sales process. And by the way, I was not using anything like what I'm using right now. I was just using all the standard techniques of presenting, persuading, closing, whatever it is I could go to sale. And I was awful at it. It was
I
just
want to
terrible.
I want to build on that too, mind you. So this was back in the 70s, right? So we don't when we're like for this style of selling, was this all door to door, just going from person to person to person?
Yeah, it was pretty much, and it was also domestic hot water, photovoltaic, electric, solar, was sort of very much in its infancy then,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it was door to door. So what I discovered is that is apartment building solar energy. Jerry
Mm-hmm.
passed a lead across my desk. There was also some leads that came in. He passed a lead across my desk, which was apartment building solar energy, and he said, "No, see what you can do with this." And everyone else poo-pooed it because it was quote too difficult. When I analyzed it, I realized that in fact a lot of it was really based on that it was really a tax shelter because there were so many rebates, both direct financial credits, that type of stuff, is that
Mm-hmm.
even the system didn't work. They got their money back within 15 to 21 months. I mean, it was refunded. And no one had recognized that, which is something I did. And
Mm-hmm.
so I utilized that. And the very, very first sale I made was the very, very first sale that I went out to. I remember the building very well. It was
Wow.
$18,500. That was in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, interesting enough, like everything else, that process got copied. So other people were doing it. And
Right.
I became the second best salesperson in selling apartment building solar energy in California. There was one guy that I used to meet once a week in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and we'd have coffee. He was always better than me, and it was just one of those things. But
Yeah.
we were good friends, and so that's really sort of where I started. But the main thing, which I think is important to note, is that while I kind of really liked the industry. I really loved the industry. I thought it was really good. And I found home from the point of view of knowing that I wanted to sell and liking what I was selling and the money that I was making. So I'd never made that kind of money before. You know, when I first saw that first commission check, I kind of looked at it and it was just, wow, this was amazing. Is that I just hated the process. There was something really uncomfortable about going through presenting and closing and handling objections, overcoming objections. There was just something that I couldn't put my finger on, but I just disliked it so much. And it also affected my mental attitude about money. Because I disliked it, I always felt the money was tainted. So therefore I used to get rid of the money very quickly. So I never really saved very much. So it was really a knock-on effect. And I felt there had to be a better way. What I used to call a better way, but in fact now I call just another way. When you start calling things a better way, then you're making things right and wrong. It's black and white and so on. And to me, it's just it's not it's not an either or world. It's an as well world. As long as you're not hurting someone, it doesn't really matter.
Well, thinking back to that first sale too, do you remember what it was like, when you first entered the conversation or was first in that room with someone you had to present and pitch to and then using these old tactics? Like, how was it just trying to carry that first sale completely green?
It was awful. I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
I'd have a cut off corner of the solar energy plate and I stick it up there and I had it framed,
Mhm.
and and I just talk about what happened, how it worked. I mean,
Yeah.
I swear whatever I did sell was because I had a fairly strong English accent then. They probably bought my accent more than they did the sale.
I think there is some power to that too. I've got some friends even still. I had one of my original mentors was someone who lived in Scotland, and so he had like sort of a Scottish English type accent. I just think
Yeah,
about when you speak to the American market or anybody that doesn't has it, it's got sort of that charm to it, where it's like you can't help but really listen to it, or you feel some
yeah,
sort of prestige to it just because of that.
yeah. Or else they felt sorry for me. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was really funny, but yeah, it was terrible. Um, but I started learning from that because I learned, for example, very quickly because I was like a sponge, and I think that was the most important thing is to be a sponge. So, for example, I'd sometimes get technician leads. Jerry used to feed me some leads that whatever came in, and I get technician leads, and they always ask me these difficult questions, technical questions, and I'd never. I'm not a technical person. I don't know how things work. And what I found is that most people don't care about how things work. They just want to know how it works, how it's going to benefit them, what is really going to be the advantage or benefit of getting whatever it is they want. The working
Mhm.
part is not that relevant. It is to some, it is to technicians. So I would go back with these questions, go back to Jerry and say, what kind of piping would you use, or what size piping would you use for such and such a length, and so on and so forth. And he'd give me the answer, and I go back again. And one day I went to him and I said, Jerry, I said, just don't give me any leads that have got that a
Mhm.
technical people who are technical. But he said, why not? I said, because they're asking all these questions. I keep on going backwards and forwards, and the commission just deteriorates into nothing whenever I do make a sale. He said, oh no, Michael. He said, that's really simple. He said, technicians, he said, they're great people. He said, no, 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 no. He says, just a matter of knowing how to understand them and how to answer them. And I said, okay, give
Mhm.
it. So he said, when they ask you a question, he said, technical people, whatever kind of technical people, just interested in how things work. And all you do is to ask them if they ask you a question and you don't know the answer to, is to say, I don't know. Is it important? And he said, if it's really important, they'll tell you, but just virtually every single time, it's not that important and they'll work it out for themselves. So I couldn't wait for my next technical person. Okay, this is a difference between in as far as mental thinking, because a lot of
Mhm.
people think, well, I still hope I don't get a technical person. I couldn't
Mhm.
wait to try this. And so I went out and was hoping that my next lead would be a technical person. It was. And he asked me a question. Now he asked me a technical question that I actually knew the answer to. So I took a deep
Of
breath and
course.
I'm not really too sure about that. is that important to you? He said, no, 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 it's fine. He said, I'll work it out for myself. And I'm thinking, gee, I was looking behind me going, I was wondering if I was set up like this with Jerry, but no. So just simple things like that, just spark the imagination and the creativity. And it really kind of started driving me forward into sort of getting more into understanding human behavior.
Yeah. No, it's amazing how that works. And I think that's something that that's such a counterintuitive approach. I wonder where that comes from, right? But it's some things like that where it's so simple that you just don't think to ask it. Sometimes I feel like
Yeah.
it's easy to get caught in that dance of going down the rabbit hole of answering and answering and answering and answering and answering. But if you just bring it to, well, is that important? And really trusting that, and this is something you talk about too, which is your prospect has the answers. You just have to know what question to ask them. And so even something like that, it's like he probably has the answer worked out, figured out somewhere he could, but prompting him to put him in that direction to try to find it himself.
Yeah.
Um, but
See,
yeah.
they have the answers as to what they want and why they want it. Um, but not always that deeply. In other words, it's not what they want into how it's going to work. They just know that they want something. And they
Mm-hmm.
also know the rationale behind it, why they want it. But a lot of times that rationale is just in their mind. And
Mm-hmm.
so the why, the emotional reason, as it were. And the questions really are designed to help them dig that out. And now listen to my words, it's not about digging it out. It's helping them to dig it out so they can lay out this menu, if you like, this formula of what it is they want, why they want it on their
Mm-hmm.
own personal terms. And from that point of view, then you can start researching, looking at, and talking about whether what they want is really what they want. Because
Yeah.
maybe what they want is something a bit different. And usually you can offer whatever it is they want, but the whole thing is essential is to talk about it in their language, not yours. And that's
Right.
why presenting doesn't work. Presenting
Right.
too soon means that you're guessing at what they want and why they want it. And the person on the other end, unless you happen to sort of hit it right, which is very rarely, is going to be resistant to that. And so
Yeah.
presenting too
Well,
soon
bring
is
it.
just a
Yeah.
problem.
And bringing that back to both that's back to your story, right? And sort of the creation of natural selling. So you had this breakthrough with just, that one question, really spinning it back around to him. How did
Yeah,
things like continue from there?
that's a good question. Thanks for bringing it back again. Um, well, it was really a matter of then searching because there was one guy that was selling for the same company, same
Mm-hmm.
product, solar energy panel. His name was Brandis. I've forgotten his first name now. Oh, I shouldn't. Anyway, he was brilliant. He would go out and sell a lot. Sold about 4 times as many as I did, and I was making really good money.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't do it often. But I asked him one day, and I said, "What is it you do?" And he spoke about relationships, and I said, "I get that, but I don't. I need some sort of structure. I'm a logical person. I'm logical as well as ethereal, but logic that does it for me. And so, which is interesting because I sell emotional, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he said, "Well, come out with me." And so I went out with him to see one of his clients, and it's a two-stage call. One is to evaluate the building and talk with the potential client,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second one is to make a presentation. And I did it twice, and each time he made a sale. And I said, "Well, what is it you're doing?" I couldn't identify what it is that he was doing, and he just came back and said, "Well, it's just about relationships." But I realized that there had to be structure behind what he was doing and where he was coming from. So, when you're set on a path to seek, stuff starts appearing in front of you. So, Larry Wilson was somebody that I first met who did counselor selling, and he was the
Mm-hmm.
first sort of person that I got to who talked about asking questions. Questions was really the way to talk about to present, to sell, if you like. And it was
Yeah.
called counselor selling. But I found it kind of cumbersome. I found that the idea was good. My sales started improving. I started getting more comfortable, which was more important to me, not just the improvement of sales, but more comfortable with what I was doing. But it was still focused on getting the sale. And for many
Mm-hmm.
years, it was always about getting the sale. Any programs that I looked at, because I looked at a lot of them, and researched and took bits and pieces, all about getting the sale. And one day I was over in England, United Kingdom. I'd arranged for a company, for a guy that I met who was starting a company that needed funding, and I was helping get the funding. And the investor asked me if I'd go over there and set up a whole sales and marketing thing, so which I did. It was great. It was really good fun.
Hmm.
And I discovered the missing ingredient that I was looking for, which was letting go of the sale. And
Really?
that was a big aha. And I stumbled upon it because I used to do one-on-one training, travel up and down the UK in a car with a salesperson. We had the preset appointments. I do the first one, he or she do the second, I do the third, and so on. And they always say to me, "How come you always get the best leads?" You know,
Right.
because
You get the
because
better opportunity, the secret,
because
you know, come with the
yeah,
boss.
because verbally, I just would make more sales than they did. So it was always laughable. But it was because I kind of clicked onto something, and something that occurred to me is that what I was doing was letting go of the sale. I wasn't starting in there with the resumption I was going to get the sale. I
Hmm.
started off with a blank slate. So anyway, after that, I thought my sister actually asked me, "So what do you want to do?" And I said, "I'm either going to find a fabulous product and help people buy it, oh, I'm going to start a training program." She said, "Well, what's closest to your heart?" And I said, "Training." She said, "Go for it." She's a business coach. So I did that and started building up the different principles,
Hmm.
and it just took off from there.
So those older styles of selling, right? I think, like you mentioned, where it's just focused on the sale. Do you feel like, I think if you just have that as your core belief, that's sort of what created a lot of those assume the sale or just kind of jumping straight to the order stuff. Because if you look at it from like the deal is already had before you walk in, that's where you kind of find yourself just skipping steps and getting to the point where you're almost not quite anxious, but it's just yeah, it's really where that pressure comes from. You're assuming A, the prospect is thinking B, and there's a real disconnect between, the intention behind the meeting or how far you feel like someone is along with
Yeah.
it. But it's also amazing too to think that like back when you were in solar and you met that other guy who was like number one in the company or things along the lines of that. Do you know if was he still like he was just someone, because you mentioned that there's sort of two types of salespeople. There's those that are just comfortable with the pressure tactics and those who aren't. Was he someone who sort of fell in that camp of just he was just comfortable with, that older style of selling?
I don't know because I didn't know enough to find out about that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how he sold.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he had a better company that was installing
Mm-hmm.
um, than I did.
Mm-hmm.
Because it wasn't my installation company. Again, I was an independent contractor.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. We just sort of swapped stories and so on and so forth. But literally, I did not know enough to ask those kinds of questions. I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. Now coming to the creation of natural selling, this is something I'm running into now. Some of the work I'm doing just as like a sales manager, I'm constantly developing and talking to other reps and trying to get them to be proficient. Were you someone that you found your way into being comfortable as a teacher, or is that something you felt like you had to develop as a skill, just the same way you did with selling?
Really had to develop it as a skill. Um, I was somewhat comfortable, but in my first year to 2 years, I would put myself in front of anyone that I could to
Mm-hmm.
start talking about what it was I was doing. But I also took a couple of lessons too,
Mm-hmm.
from the point of view of speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and learned a really valuable lesson there is that, and I'll share it with you, um, in that when I had to do some video work, which is the second sort of stage of the training,
Mm-hmm.
um, my instructor drew me out and just hauled me across the coals and said, "This is awful. This is terrible." And I had to do it
Mm-hmm.
in front of the other trainees as well. And I said, I mean, and it's not often an instructor would say that to you, but he knew what he was doing. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he was very, very skilled. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Look at your eyes." He said, "They're darting around like vipers." He said, "And you're using techniques and tactics and so on and so forth." And he
Mm-hmm.
said, "And you're doing totally the opposite of what you actually train and where you come from."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "You're in a self." And he said, I said, "Well, why? I mean, what do I do?" He said, "Look, just go out there and talk naturally about anything you like, just anything."
Yeah.
And so I did. And he said, no, come back and look at this. And he said, look, this is you. This is you talking to your audience, your authentic self. He says, all you have to be is your authentic self. He said, you don't have to know much, but that's what they're buying. That's what they're buying into. The audience is your authentic self, where you're coming from. And you can make mistakes. You can do whatever. They'll forgive you. They'll always forgive you because you're coming from your authentic self. And that was a powerful, powerful lesson. And it was also powerful from the point of view of training with people, whether I did in groups, one-on-one, or whatever. But that was amazing.
Yeah, being able to get people in tune with just, I think, just speaking authentically as opposed to relying too much on like um the script, or like you said, the tactics. It's exactly that. I feel like there's
Well,
certainly a phase. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'll share something. I used to experiment a lot from the stage, because in the
Mm-hmm.
first 10, 15 years, I traveled around the world, talking in front of, quite large audiences. And something would come to me and I would experiment with a new phrasing or something that came to me, some mindset thinking. I would just talk about it, because I figured if it came to me, then from somewhere which is, from other source, there might be some meaning to it. And I would play with it. And if I got it wrong, I would just sort of just say something like, well, that didn't work, did it? And the
Yeah.
whole audience would laugh because they because I wasn't stuck on what I was saying. In fact, I start my whole presentations with the question, do you have to believe what I'm saying? And they go, no. And then I look sort of sad and go sort of, pretend to look sad. So, well, why not? He said, because it's only your opinion. Yes, you've got it. That's right. It's only my opinion. And so that was freeing,
Wow.
because no
Yeah.
one could come back at me and said, you said this and we should do this, because I never ever said it. So I start
Yeah.
off by saying, this is only my opinion.
Wow. No, that's incredible. That's incredible.
So
I
that,
think one thing.
finish that. See, that's part of the law of detachment,
Mhm.
is being able to let go of that sale. So I never assume a sale. I just know that whatever way it's going to work out, it's going to work out, because I'm using the best of my ability to not sell this person into my program, but to help this person buy into the program if it's appropriate to do so, if they're qualified to do so, if they have the ability to do so, if they have the financial ability to do so. There are things which come up which make it impossible for someone to do it. So I'm not interested in trying to force a sale or create a sale.
Mhm.
The sale is there to be made if you know how to go about it correctly, and the conditions are right.
Yeah. Something interesting too, you mentioned earlier on, which is I think the idea of the money feeling like it was tainted, especially when you get it in a weird way. I see that's something that I feel like it's something that people run into a lot in their development, especially when it comes into the selling. Because when you're selling, you're really forced to confront your beliefs. At least that's what I experience. Is when you get really good at it, you're constantly helping people overcome their beliefs and talking people through like their challenges and their struggles. And to be able to do that, you have to be very certain in yourself to be like, I'm someone who's comfortable walking people through this. And so, how do you feel like, how are you able to overcome your limiting beliefs around money and stuff like that? Because I find a lot of reps will, in the beginning, sometimes they'll just start just to make cash and then they hit like a roadblock because they hit their money needs and then they've got a new set of beliefs and it kind of creates this can of worms where they're never quite where they need to be relationship with money wise to get people over the line effectively or help people the way they need to. So, yeah, could you speak to that of how you sort of got yourself through that? And then, where do you see people get stuck and how do you get past those sorts of beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was intellectually easy. I mean, intellectually, I could understand it. The application of it was sometimes uh, difficult, and the application to me was just progression. I think some of that still sticks with me,
Mhm.
and I have to question it. I mean, the first step to change is awareness,
Mhm.
and if you can make yourself immediately aware that not you necessarily, but we bring up past conditioning in our subconscious, which is really that's where all this stuff comes from.
Mhm.
Um, and think about it, have a quick think about it and a quick check, and then move it forward. I don't think there's any one particular answer. I mean, there are people who actually teach on this, about sort of uh, the whole money attitude, you
Mhm.
know, and I certainly was carried that with me for a long time because of my
Mhm.
upbringing. Some people transcend it right away. Some people just sort of just get it right away.
Right.
So it's not an easy question to answer, but it wasn't particularly easy for me, but I did understand it. And as I began to understand it, I began to be more careful with that money, realizing that um, it was important that I don't that it was no longer tainted. As I begin to understand. So it's
Yeah.
almost like here's an analogy. Someone asked me the other day about about talking with a person who is resistant to wanting to make a change, and
Hmm.
then continuing with them. What we would call, in a sense, in traditional sense, hard closing.
Hmm.
But it wasn't hard closing. It was just being tenacious in helping this person buy. And he asked me, he said, would you listen to this and watch this video of this? And it was like 40 minutes. So I did, and said, I bet you hated that. And I said, actually, no, which is sort of surprised myself.
Hmm.
And he said, why not? I said, because it occurred to me, it depends on where you're coming from. Because if you're coming from a place that you're trying to persuade someone to do something because you want to make the money, because you want to get quota. It's all self-directed. It's all inward. It's all about us, and we're
Hmm.
doing it for us. I said no. I said that is manipulation of its worst, and it just leads to catastrophe in most cases at the end. I said, but if it's something that you've established a good relationship and you know that this person really does need this, and that you do have the right solution, and you know it in your heart and hearts, and you're coming from that place of empathy. I said, I think under those conditions, it's okay to help that person and hold their hand and pull them along or give them a bit of a shove or something like that,
Hmm.
because it's really about them. So that was kind of a new philosophy that came up recently in my mind, thinking, yeah, okay, so that sort of past idea of hard closing. I hate that word, but anyway. There's an adjustment there, and it's just like everything else. It's like our life is a progressive piece of work of learning.
Right.
So it's a roundabout way of sort of answering your original question. Trust me.
Yeah, no, no, I mean, I love it. It's so well put and well articulated. And I think connecting off of that too, I think the structure that you've created itself, and give me 1 second here, I'll put a graphic up on the screen for people to see. But the structure that you actually created for natural selling, um, was that something that you had that much clarity of when you began, or how did you get to that point where you had so much clarity to be able to break it down to, connecting and all the different phases that go into that and chunking it down more? I guess in short, like what was the evolution of that structure, or yeah, and how did that come to fruition?
Yeah. Are you talking about the 5 stages of the natural selling conversational dialogue?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, the 5 stages there. Yeah, because there are 5 stages, and then which is the connecting stage, discovery stage, transition stage, presenting stage,
Hmm.
and then you have the committing stage, what some people call closing, the committing stage.
Hmm.
Um, that was a structure that I developed from um, a book that I read by Neil Rackham, which was called Spin Selling. You might have heard about it.
I have, it's interesting you say that because spin selling was something that was in my sales development journey for one of my early mentors, but it's something that I don't think, I mean, common nowadays. It's in Rackham and I think it's the Rackham Institute as well. All of that stuff is under the radar. Very few people I feel like know about him, at least in the more like Twitter, Young Money, high ticket closing. That whole
Yeah,
community is just completely unaware of him. But
yeah.
yeah, you were saying?
Well, yeah, no, you're right. And that sort of gave me an insight because I'd already was developing. And I was looking at um, the structure of the program. But the book, I mean, it's a really good book, but I found it kind of quite complicated, very detailed, quite complicated in some ways. And that was just me. Maybe it wasn't, but it's just me. Um, in as far as that trying to connect everything together. It was like a lot of pieces of jigsaw puzzle, and trying to sort of work it so that it would come together. And the other thing was it was still in essence behind it, focusing on getting the sale, believe it or not.
Mm,
And that sort of was not sitting well with me because I was already into the process of detachment. Detachment being sort of a major part of the program. It's the biggest mindset part of the program. And I sort of looked at that and said, okay, that's a good idea of a structure. And so what I did was to create my own structure because I saw a structure, and then took the most important part, which is the discovering stage, to be able to create different types of questions to understand the power of those questions, to understand why, why you were asking that question. What was the question, which can come in a lot of different forms, and then why were you asking that question, and whether the question was relevant or not. And so that's where that developed from. So I owe a lot to Neil Rackham for giving me the idea of structure.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that entirely. With the spin selling book, it's interesting. It's a very finite distinction you make where it comes from that whole point of attachment to the sale. Because I don't think once in the book he does mention that having distance to it. It's very much like it's you're in here.
Yeah.
This is a more strategic way to get the deal done. But at no point does it say there's a chance you might not get the deal at the end. I think the whole book is tied around that. And it's a very technical book too. It's like very tactical and just like, here's a list of questions. This is your outcome. It's like very technical, like mathematic. But I think the thing that really makes natural selling, I think it's just the fact that it's natural. Where Rackham, I think it might be a projection of the fact that he's a researcher and it's just how he sort of sees things in a very technical data sense.
Yeah.
But that's really the beauty, I feel like, in natural selling is you sort of bridge that gap when you bring in that personable aspect to it, where spin selling in the wrong hands, I mean, spin selling, sure, anybody could do it, but the difference between those people that get successful and the people who don't are people I feel like who are more like yourself, who can bring that human aspect to it. And like you said, with the relationship and the detachment and thing like that. Um, and I guess segueing from that, with all the people that you've taught natural selling to, or students and mentees you've had, what are some of the things that you see right off the bat that are sort of the biggest cues to you that you see someone with talent or someone that will really get it? Because I feel like in the sales world, a lot of people enter it because it's just this low barrier to entry, come in sort of the last saloon on the last town, come in. But it's very clear, I think, when you're in it, that it's not that. It's just as competitive as almost anything else. But what do you sort of see, or what are the things you look for that separate those people who really crush it? Or, what is that sort of those traits of those, those have like those people that you see have a lot of potential compared to those who, may sort of struggle their way through it?
That's a kind of hard one to answer because I think with sort of having done it for the length of period that I've been doing it, it's an innate sense. And because it's an innate sense, it's difficult to understand. So for example, I just do one-on-one training, coaching, and mentoring now, as you probably know. Even though I have an online course, which I'm going to rewrite because I find that just a little bit too technical. I'm going to sort of smooth it out a bit. I mean, life is a progression, right?
Naturally.
So let me just think about that for a second. It's like it's an understanding. Oh,
it's not an easy one to answer,
I
and
can't really,
in
I can't really answer it. It's just that it's where a person is coming from, which is why, for example, before I'll talk with anyone, no, I'll talk with anyone, but before I spend time talking with them about possibility of doing some one-on-one training, it's absolutely vital they read that book, with my online book, How to Sell the Way People Buy, because it's got in there the fundamental mindset. It has the three main causes of objection and rejection, as you know, and also the 5 principles of natural selling, which turn this around. And it's really about coming from a different place, and it's important that they pick up on that and they respond to that, rather than come in and saying, so I want to learn how to sell. It's like, well, I can teach you how to sell, but it's whether you can really grasp some or all of the mindset as to whether I can teach you effectively to do it. It doesn't mean to say that if you use the old techniques, I mean, 15% of the sales force still use the old techniques. They do it very well because they're drivers, their personality, and they just barge in there. They make it. God bless them, whatever works for them. but if you want to come from my point of view, it's like that mindset is really, really important to be able
Mhm.
to grasp it and to make it just soar to the moon.
Yeah. Well, and on that too, what do you sort of see as the progression for someone? Like, let's say you got someone who's the blank slate. What do you feel like would be the best path for someone to walk down to get to the point where they're proficient?
Really, I think, well, this is from my point of view, not wishing to be self-serving, but from my point of view is to first of all, you know, be involved in sales. You know, have a product that you really like or somewhat like. You know,
Hmm.
I don't think you necessarily have to like it, but it really helps if it's part
Hmm.
of that. I mean, if you can make it part of, but sometimes you grow into it, like I sort of discovered, if you can make it part of your purpose in life,
Hmm.
because I couldn't think of doing anything else. You know, I
Hmm.
mean, this is what I, but when I took on the sales job selling solar, it was kind of almost like a last ditch attempt before I kind of, you know, kill myself or something like this. I didn't mean that,
Hmm.
but because I said it, maybe I did. But you know, and then I discovered this is what I really want to do. You know, I want not sell solar necessarily, but
Hmm.
to to sell. But I didn't
Hmm.
know that I'd ever go to this depth. Um, so uh, um, so really, I think it's about finding a product to first of all, um, to sort of work your way through,
Yeah.
and then it's very sort of oh gosh, that's so hard to say because a lot of people that I speak to, most of them, um, you know, they want to achieve something. They
Hmm.
want to be able to do something with selling, but just throw their hands up in despair because it's not working for them.
Hmm.
Because they're part of that population where the old techniques just aren't working and they've never
Hmm.
changed. And
Yeah.
so I think it's like that, almost like the hero's journey. You struggle and then you just lose it, and then you
Right.
think like I did. There has to be another way, or there has to be a better way, and you're
Hmm.
scrabbling around looking for it, and eventually you find it. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think something interesting too, and I'm from one of your earlier interviews, something like that, is you'd mentioned like, with a lot of this, there was seeking, but you didn't necessarily know what you were seeking for. And I
Yeah,
think like part of the journey, like you said, I mean, as dark of a beginning it might have had, it's sort of just, I think, being comfortable with the fact that the progression, like the time takes time. You can't sort of like, I think, be too overly, it's like you can't be too focused on the deal. It's the same way you can't, I don't think you can be too focused on any one thing. You have to have a certain level of detachment with yourself and those things that you want to be able to let yourself naturally carry yourself there. And it's amazing to see that what you've created has now gotten to where the point it is now. I'd love to look at as well as, what do you think about what's happened with sort of like the offshoots of your knowledge and stuff like that? Because you're very much under the radar. Actually, I found you through a friend of a friend who had found your work and then found the testimonial. And so, sort of the elephant in the room, in sense, I'd like to say as well, is like Jeremy Minor in the world of seventh level and what that's become. You know, what was your relationship like with Jeremy in the early stages, or how did you two even come to meet?
um, it was very good. It was about 20 years ago, maybe 22 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We were I was training for a company, a high ticket company,
Mm-hmm.
online. Sorry, sort of online and telephone sales,
Mm-hmm.
which I really love. I think is telephone is really the way to go, or Zoom, but however way you want to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we met there, and he wanted to find out more. I think I'd written my book then, and he had the book, and he wanted to find out more. So he flew up to see me in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
We spent 2 days, and I went through the process with him. Um, Something like this. It's a little bit vague about how it all started, but it was something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And he started developing that, and he became the top salesperson in the company.
Mm-hmm.
And then he moved to another company. That company folded, or started collapsing. He moved to another company, and I happened to be their sales trainer as well,
Mm-hmm.
and doing the same thing, training people. And he was picking up on that, and he became the top salesperson there. And he did that with three different companies, and
Mm-hmm.
we kept in regular touch. He used to call me all the time at the beginning, sort of asking me questions about, how would you do this? I mean, it was virtually every other day
Mm-hmm.
for quite a long period of time. Um, and so that happened until he decided that he wanted to start his own company, and basically replicated most of my material with making adjustments. And put together a very good marketing program, very good structure
Hmm.
program, and so on, which is why it's sort of got quite a high profile out there,
Hmm.
and met some good people, and so on and so forth. But you see, my whole thing was is I never really wanted to manage a large company.
Hmm.
I was never that was never a thing of mine. I'm not a good manager, so
Mm.
I decided that long time ago that I'd keep it fairly small. But you're right, it is under the radar.
Yeah,
It's good.
I feel like it might be better that way, you know? It's like with art and stuff like that. Sometimes like it's got more value if it's small and it's got sort of its in club to a sense, right? As opposed to maybe being this big, more esteemed thing as well. But I also find it interesting too, because as much as it's very obvious that NEPQ is just reskinned natural selling. There's now other mentors or like people, friends of mine who've started their own sales programs and methodologies that are just reskinned NEPQ. And it's funny because they see that and they're thinking like, oh, Jeremy was the creator of that. And now like Jeremy might be, they might be nitpicky about other influencers who are using their same methodology. But it comes full circle where it's like, I don't think it's really, I mean, it's yours really at its core and having created it. But I think there's like that quote, good artists create, great artists steal. So I'm just curious as to sort of seeing how we'll evolve. But I guess on that, um, obviously, I think how we communicate and the language we use and the way that people understand their realities, like we have the same desires, just the way we express them are a bit different. We might use different words to wrap them.
Mm.
What do you sort of see as like the future for just sales and sort of this environment? Natural selling seems like it's something that's timeless, but how has it evolved, I guess, internally, language wise? Do you do much about thinking about how language has changed in certain phases for questions, or how do you continue to, or how do you find those innovations for it?
Yeah, I think language has changed. Languaging is really important. The structure of sentences and so on. And you can start looking at things like NLP, Gestalt
Mm-hmm.
therapy. A lot of the different therapies phrase questions in certain ways, which is really valuable.
Mm-hmm.
On a side aspect. But I think fundamentally it hasn't changed that much. It's just the way, how can I put it? As sort of neuroscience has developed over the last decade, especially,
Mm-hmm.
um, and different therapies. I learned of a new one yesterday afternoon, for example. We
Mm-hmm.
invited some friends over to lunch, and I learned of a new therapy, as it were, and it like, wow, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Using same sorts of questions and ideas, but 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 looking into and deeper into different aspects of the mind, as it were, or the behavior, helping
Mm-hmm.
people change their behavior. Um, but I think fundamentally, yeah, there is a progression of it. It's not. It can be huge. It depends, but you can still use the same stuff that you used, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, from my point of view. But I do adjust them when I look at my training scripts, and I see a different way of expressing something. Then I'll
Mm-hmm.
pop that into the training script, in
Mm-hmm.
case it has relevance to a particular person that I'm training with.
Yeah, it's awesome.
But when
And
but when you
mhm.
but when you talk about languaging too, languaging is it comes from a thought. Everything starts with a thought. You look at Buddha, um, any sort of, but it doesn't matter what it is. Everything starts with a thought,
Mhm.
and the words you use can give you away, which is why it's so important right at the beginning when you're connecting with someone and starting a discovery, is that you have to come from this place, from my world anyway. You have to come from this place of detachment, and you have to structure your words in such a way that you're not letting any fears or any assumptions dictate what you're saying.
Mhm.
So if you have a fear that this person is going to start, quote, raising objections, the way you structure your words and the way you say them will will that will affect the way that you structure words, the way you say them right from the beginning. And virtually all the times you won't know it, because it's more of an energy as well as the words.
Yeah,
So there's an old Sufi saying is that the words you use is the house you live in. And so use of words is really important. And I'll give you one right now. You use the word prospects. I will not use the word prospects.
interesting. Yeah, and that plays upon like what you said a moment ago, which is, you almost, I think you might have said you try to use almost as few of using as much as your prospects language as possible, as opposed to trying to bring things into the conversation. That's something that at least I've begun to see. I mean, I've spent enough time sort of with your work and sort of around the style of selling that I feel like is one of the hardest things to teach people. It's just that whole idea of like your prospects will give you almost all the words you need to use. It's just a matter of getting it out of them or listening enough to know when they've given you it. And like just being comfortable playing in their world. Um, there's much more influence to be had when you're solely using their language and living in their reality and really embodying sort of how they see and interpret things. It sort of develops a much tighter rapport than opposed to trying to give them things like, being an action taker or giving them different things to try to attach to. But that's a real finite skill inside of itself. That's almost hard to articulate. It's almost something that you more so see in the call when you enter that rapport with someone or enter that dance when you're in a conversation. Um, Now, do you spend a lot of time too, like in calls? Do you spend time like I guess like the whole idea of pre-handling around limiting beliefs, because I find like as far as the structure goes and getting a bit more technical, I find that it's really interesting because almost any questions and concerns or objections I get at the end of the call come up earlier on in the call. And now it's just a matter of being aware of when they're there and being able to address them sooner so that you don't have to deal with them later. But I guess how do I bring this to a question? Things along the lines of limiting beliefs. Are you proactive in your calls to try to like free handle things and take care of limiting beliefs and things that might come up at the end? Or are you more so a proponent of, yeah, how do you handle limiting beliefs and what's your thoughts behind that in a call?
Who's limiting beliefs? Your limiting own limiting beliefs or their limiting beliefs?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, the prospects, but I feel like another thing to talk about too is our own and how that influences the call as well, right? But the prospects limiting beliefs, at least the awareness that we might have of them.
Well, first of all, from where I come from, is that stop using the word prospects.
Prospects. Yeah. I'll
If
get a
I
little rubber band. I'll put it on
if
and
I
whack
if I
myself.
call if I think about it, if I call you a prospect, how will you feel about that?
I'm not a thing. That's like, yeah, it's like I'm saying I'm prey.
See, that's it. Well, that's it of one of many things. You're not a thing, you're a person. Same as, the word consumer. You hear on TV all the time about consumers. You're not a consumer. I'm not a consumer. I'm a person. And the people we talk with are people. And there's Nietzsche, a German philosopher once said, when you brand me, you negate me. And so when you
Mhm.
talk about people as prospects, so this is very important. So that's why I'm jumping in front of
Yeah.
your question there. When you talk about people as prospects, you think about people as prospects. And when you think about prospects, then you're thinking of them as an object to get what you want, or you're thinking of them in a sort of a general term, or you're thinking of them not as a person. And the whole thing is that when you pick up the phone or you start a conversation with someone, this is a person you're talking with, a person who has got their own life, a person who knows what they want, they know why they want it. Sometimes and many times they're not getting what they want, and many times they don't know why they're not getting what they want, or maybe they make wrong decisions. But it's our job is to help them sort through their own minds to get to where they want to go. So the moment you start talking with someone and thinking of them as a person, I mean, at best call them a potential buyer or potential customer, or you could call them a prospective customer. Okay, even
Mm,
then that has some branding, but sometimes we need words just to be able to, understand something. But you
yeah.
start shifting away from the object to the person themselves. So it's really, really important to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So I will never use, unless it's in context, I mean, I never use the word prospect. You're not a prospect as far as I'm concerned. And having said that, I forgot the question you asked me.
Yeah. Well, I guess handling limiting beliefs in prospective customers
Oh,
and in yourself.
yeah. Okay, so let's take it from perspective of of having sold a product or service. You have a pretty good idea sometimes of what um, concerns a person might have. Um, and, people should ask questions. They should, not should, but are going to have concerns depending on where they came from and what you've already discussed. They're going to make comments as well. And you accept that as a fact of life, not as something to overcome or to be nervous about. You make that as part of your conversational dialogue. See, in traditional selling, it's separate from it. It's like, okay, so you're going to present what you've got. You're going to close them, use ABC, always be closing, and
All the different stuff.
then you're going to handle the objections. It's like it puts the fear of God in people, in salespeople, because right from the beginning, they're kind of thinking in terms what are they thinking about? They're thinking, I hope this person doesn't come up with any objections.
Yeah.
And they're not objections, they're just questions. They're just if they have any, they're concerns. They're comments that they make. It's just that's what people do. You do that in everyday conversation. And the whole idea is to have an everyday conversation, but a very skilled conversation with someone to help them get what they want, and hopefully with what you've got. But if it's not the right one, then don't sell it to them. If there's something else that's better, then refer that, because it always comes back to you.
Yeah.
You refer stuff and what have you. The universe will deliver it back to you. It might not be tomorrow or today, but it will come back to you. And so that's really the key. It's like me. I'm under the radar. I've been on the radar for a long time. Well, I'm not hurting.
Yeah.
I mean, it always spins back. So from that point of view of limiting beliefs, get rid of the kind of preconception or the idea that these people are out to resist you. They're not, but they will resist you or object to you. But what they object to is your behavior. So if you start pressuring them, you start telling them what they should do and why they should do it, and you start telling them how great your product is because, who cares? They don't care, because unless you've actually hit the mark and related to what it means to them, they're just going to listen to you without listening. And when the time comes, and if you haven't hit that mark and you haven't asked them the right questions at the right time, right types of questions, I should say, at the right time, they're going to resist you. So the way you remove the resistance is to stop thinking in terms that they're going to come up with the resistance, and at the same time build it into your conversation. So, but you don't.
How do you mean?
But you don't build it indirectly. You don't say things. Now you're probably thinking that, because that will bring up. It's like it'll bring up a possible piece of resistance. But the way you structure your questions, it brings out whatever their knowledge is of that particular subject.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
money is one, for example. Depending on the context, money is that comes up. Is that you can build your questions to build a case, and then you can actually say something to the effect of, for example, now I think you can appreciate this. This is obviously you're going to need some funds for this. Do you have that budgeted? Do you have available funds set up for this kind of program? That's just in context.
Yeah.
But you have to ask that at the right time, after you've built a case around the fact that they're in need of something, and you can deliver it.
Yeah. It's almost a fearless approach where it's something you can see on calls too, when people have a certain timidity around that, as opposed to like what you're proposing. It's like it's just to be comfortable with, be comfortable and fearlessly addressing it. Make it part of your conversation, but make it just as natural as everything else. Don't make it feel like it's this one thing that is, sure. Well, do you have money for the program? It's like, no, just let's like make it just as like the same way you're learning about where they're from, what their problems are. Do you have money? What can you afford? What would work? And yeah, and I guess like you said, I mean, you didn't even really call it objections, right? But it's just sort of like it's natural for your prospective customers to have questions around what it is they're doing and stuff like that. And it's not, I think that's a huge one, is they're not objecting to you, they're objecting to how you're behaving, they're objecting to what you're doing.
That's precisely it. It's the definition of dictionary of definition of objections is something I'm rewriting alone. Is the action of challenging or disagreeing with something. And so that's a dictionary definition. So it's okay for them to disagree. I mean, you don't necessarily always get it right every single time when you're talking with people, having dialogue. and they might disagree with something, which is fine. People have the right to disagree. The question is where is that disagreement coming from?
Mm.
And you make that as part of your natural selling conversational dialogue. You make it part of it, not separate from it.
Mm.
And sometimes they have a point. You know, there's a good book, another book, what's it called now? Heck, it's gone out of my head. It's about getting to the issue, getting to yes. Another good book to read is Getting to Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to deal with the fact that you're dealing with issues. And sometimes it can be a bit scary because if you're focused on the fact that you've got to get the sale and that selling is all about getting the sale, it can actually be sort of quite disturbing. But if you're not, you can actually be very productive
Yeah.
because your issue might not be the right issue. It's in everyday life. You might have a belief, you might have something that you argue for, but if
Mm-hmm.
you're open to it and you're open to dialogue, not just discussion, but dialogue, you might find that your belief has got holes in it. And what the other
Yeah.
person's saying actually is got more truth to it. Something that's missing nowadays in life in general, you know. So it's really a sort of an attitude overall. So when you talk about limiting beliefs, so yes, you're limiting belief from the point of view of how you approach people, what you think is right or wrong. Doesn't matter what's right or wrong, it's irrelevant. And the limiting belief of other people who have limiting beliefs from the understanding of how they might be able to achieve what it is they want to achieve. And so
Mm.
that's where we help them. That's a secondary aspect of the whole dialogue, is helping them dig out those problems which they didn't know that they have, or don't know that will come up if they don't change, or they change in a direction which isn't going to serve them. And that takes a certain amount of skill, and that takes a bit of time, but it's like everything else. You learn that as you go.
Yeah, that is huge. The idea it's like one, they might know things that you don't. And I think being respectful of that fact makes it easier, I think, to stay in the state that you need to be in, or keeping the mindset you need to have, which is just the genuinely listening and genuinely caring. But two,
Yeah.
it's not so much limiting beliefs, but it's just limiting beliefs around how they can go about achieving those things they want. It doesn't mean they don't want that thing. It doesn't mean they're objecting to your product. They just don't have the right idea, or maybe the right mindsets or right way of seeing how they can get themselves to that point. And that's where we step in to help them create or understand problems that they didn't realize that they were facing with it. And you think about overcoming the money objection, right? It might be not so much that they don't have the money, they just don't have the right way of looking at the limiting beliefs around what they can do with their current circumstances to get those things that they want, despite what they're given currently. And so it's on us to sort of bring that fresh perspective. Um,
Can I just break in there for a second? See,
yes.
you talk about overcoming the money objective. See, to me, it's not about that at all. It's not about overcoming the money objective. It's about discussing the money issue.
Mm.
Think of the difference in words here, the energy, overcoming the money objective and discussing the money issue. Think of the difference in energy. What's the difference in energy?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, it's not like an objection is something that's like this is a problem that they have that we don't experience, and something that it's more blaming in a sense, where it's like they're giving an objection as opposed to an issue, which is like it's something they're struggling with that they need help.
Because you don't know what that issue is. I mean, this is the truth. You don't know what people are thinking. When people say something, and you make an assumption, I'm not talking about you necessarily, I'm talking about the sort of the world, you know,
Right.
universal, is that I guarantee 100% you do not know what people are thinking. So when you make an assumption that you know what people are thinking, and you think that the money objection, so-called money objection, and you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking in those terms, and you've got a set pat answer for it, okay, such as the feel felt found. Yeah, I know, you know, I know how you feel. You know, a lot of my clients felt the same way, but what they found was it's nonsense, because what you're doing is you're not acknowledging where that person is coming from. You're not honoring
Mm-hmm.
where that person is coming from. You're demonstrating you're not even prepared to listen to where that person is coming from. And
Mm-hmm.
so consequently, when you try and handle or overcome so-called objections, you can, which are basically concerns or comments or questions, you can
Mm-hmm.
basically set up resistance immediately on the spot. You can have a perfectly good conversation with somebody, And then
Yeah.
as soon as you start thinking in those terms and you try and overcome their so-called objection, you'll create resistance. The very thing you don't want to do. So you have to kind of rethink it. And it all starts, not doesn't all start, but a lot of it starts with rethinking your terminology, the standard sales terminology. And to me, objections is not something to be overcome. Objections only arise if they're objecting to your behavior. And then you've got a tough road to get around, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's like as you said earlier with languaging with your prospect, but even with ourselves, like when I asked about the limiting beliefs, I my prospect, my bad, with your prospective customer. But yeah, even with the limiting beliefs in prospective customer, you're like, whose limiting beliefs? The customers or yours? And when we talk about languaging, it's like whose language? Like it's now I'm realizing it's not just so much their languaging, but also my languaging and my understanding of their situation. How am I interpreting it?
Yeah. See,
But I'm
when you talk about their limiting beliefs too, is part of the fun of this whole thing is to help them dig through their limiting beliefs. You know, for example, people say to me, not necessarily just in sales, but in practice outside of sales, so you can't do that. So why not? Well, you just can't do that. I said, well, why can't I do it? Well, you can't. You know, and that would be a normal response. And I said, well, let me ask you this: has someone else done it? Well, yeah. So why can't I do it? You know, and it's usually where they're coming from, which is attempting to limit what I can do and where I can go and what I can think. Because
mhm.
usually a lot of times in that context it's being done, you know. And it's not, and when you hear it's little kids or someone saying, I can't do that. It's like you can't, the question is, you can't do that or you won't do that.
Yeah,
Because in most cases, you can do that unless there is some perhaps physical limiting aspect. But usually, you know, things have been done. So it can be done. It's just that you can't do it or you won't do it. And if you won't
yeah,
do it, let's work out why you won't do it. And it's okay.
yeah,
It's okay. The why you won't do it at the end of the day is okay. You don't have to do it. But let's talk about it. Let's help you work through this limiting belief of yours. And in a sense, that's another part of natural selling. You're doing that indirectly through asking the right types of questions.
yeah. I've got another question that's it's a tough one to ask, but it's something
Okay.
I'm seeing. I spend a lot of time like I'm constantly coaching, developing, and training reps, but it seems like there's certain levels of proficiency people need to have before you can even go to topics, almost as ethereal as this, right? Where it's like those are very nuanced things to be aware of, or would you even feel like it's something you're even aware of, or is it just something you just well, at this point for you? I'm sure it's ingrained, but I guess the question itself is like if you were to try to chunk up people's development into like three core stages, what do you feel like they are? Like what are the big points you feel people get stuck at, and then what are the ways to move past it? I guess a good analogy, right, is like in business sometimes you'll see some businesses, at least what we see in some of our accounts, 0 to like a quarter million a month is like the first sticking point, a quarter million to like 500,000 is another sticking point, and then 500,000 to 1 million. And at each one of those, the first one is just like you don't have team, you don't have like enough infrastructure, you don't have systems in place. Then from there, you haven't figured out like how to be very effective strategy wise and getting leads in. And then from there, it's just a matter of consistently developing. But that's just one sort of overlay, right? Which would be in business. But for you in sales development, what are the big places where people almost get caught up in their development? And then what are the ways to progress past that?
Well, the thing that comes to me is the idea of setting quotas such as money,
Mm-hmm.
because if that's your objective, if that's your target, then that's already ingrained that you need to be able to set that target, as opposed to changing the whole mental attitude, is thinking in terms of how many people can we help this month? How many people can we help buy our product or service this month? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's really the whole thing. It's a difference in mental thinking of thinking in terms of when you get up in the morning. I write about this in my book, which is, you know, I get up in the morning and think, you know, I have to call X number of people today and close Y, you know, as opposed to thinking in terms of well, I have to call X number of people today to see if they have the types of problems that I can help them solve. Totally different mental attitude.
Mm,
And if you get off the kind of the tangible, which is the focus on you've got to meet quota or get to quota or something like this, you know, if you just move yourself, you'll pass quota. Quota doesn't matter. I was talking with someone, for example, who was saying that he's a setter. He
mm,
sets lead. Um, he sort of sets leads. He's involved in the total sales process, but it's sort of multi-layered. And he's
mm,
saying that he sets the most leads, but he doesn't. But he slipped down from the number of people who've bought. And so it was like, well, what are you concentrating on? You're concentrating on being the best setter, or you better concentrating on creating the best quality leads for your sort of tag team, as it were. You know, it's a different point of view that it comes from
mm,
and the real and the world of selling, not the real world, but in the world of selling, where you got corporate governance with sales managers, sales directors, and marketing and all that sort of stuff, all these people with turf that they've got to protect, they
mm,
just fall back to standard stuff. And so consequently, that's where most salespeople are stuck in. They're stuck in the logical standard stuff. But
mm,
it's a subtlety, but it's a huge one to
mm,
move yourself from the fact of setting a quota into changing the quota from something like, you know, got to make $500,000 this month or in sales to, you know, I'm going to need to help 10 people um, legitimately, or just letting it go and just saying, you know, my job this month is to help as many people as I can,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
zoom past the quota because you won't even notice it because you're having so much fun doing it that, you know, by the middle of the month you're past that 500,000. You're going, wow, this is incredible, this is great fun, you know, and then you continue doing it.
Yeah, so I guess when it comes to managing, well, yeah, when it comes to managing, it's not like, oh, we didn't hit our numbers, we didn't help enough people this week. What can we do to help more people? And getting people focused on that. Like, who didn't we show up for all the way? How many people did we like not, commit to helping fully and getting them to the point that they need to be at? It's that sort of shift, and I think it's just got such a better energy to it as well, even just articulating it as opposed to saying we didn't hit our
Yeah,
numbers. Like, what does that mean for the customer? They don't care what
yeah.
numbers we hit. It's like, how many people did we help? How many people got over the line? And what results are we getting? And keeping the focus there. Um, it's
we
interesting because that's,
that was You can finish your sentence and I'll bring mine, sorry.
well, I was gonna say it's almost like when you talk about the old school way of selling and the new school way of selling with tactics, that's almost its own split as well, which is the older traditional way of looking at it, which is like the numbers, the targets, the cash, this. The new ways, how many people did we help? How many people were we committed to? How well were we showing up for these people that we needed to help and stuff like that? Um, Compared to just that more traditional numbers. And sure, I mean the numbers are there, but it's interesting, like you say that it's like I mean, if you focus on helping people and just focus on showing up consistently, and I think that's something that, in my breakthroughs I've had, I've been in that state, but I guess it's not something I was consciously aware of. I was just that committed to helping people and I would get incredible performance out of myself. And then the numbers took care of itself. And sure, the undertone was to make money, but I know that if I'm just looking at trying to get the deal, it doesn't mean anything. If I'm there on that call and when we're at the end and we're working to figure out their questions and overcome limiting beliefs, that's all from the standpoint of love and helping them. I'm there to help them get over the limiting beliefs because I know it's better for them to come overcome that and get to where they want to be as opposed to giving into it and letting it continue to keep them where they're at, especially if we've had a good conversation up until that point.
Mm. And we got to wrap up.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. One more sort of topic before we tee off. So you are a published author, you've got your book and you've got other things on Amazon. But I was curious because when I went through your other publications for Amazon, you've got work on disablement and deconstructing undecidability. But I was really curious about the disablement side of things. Are those sort of where does that influence come from? Or is that still stuff you're active in?
I'm not aware of that disablement. What do you mean?
On Amazon for if I look up Michael Oliver, we've got your book, The Natural Selling, and then there's also another author. There's like The New Politics of Disablement, also with the Michael Oliver. There's a couple different other books in there too, but they might not be related at all,
I
though.
think it must be another Michael Oliver. You mean there's more of us? No, that's
There
not me.
might be.
No, I've got my online book, which is How to Sell the Way People Buy, uh,
Hmm.
and which leads to an online course, which I'm in the process of rewriting, restructuring, I should say. And
Yes.
then my sort of one-on-one coaching. I mean, there are various bits and pieces lying around,
Yeah.
but no, I'm not involved in politics.
Yeah, no worries then. Well, I think with that winding that down, yeah, Michael, where do you feel like would be the best place for anybody who watches this to contact you?
That easy. Just go to naturalselling.com
Hmm.
and basically it's all there.
Yeah,
It's a
very straightforward.
very simple website. Nothing complicated about it. Um, the wording, I think, tells all. And
Yeah.
if it resonates with everyone, then sort of take some progressive steps through it and see sort of what comes out the other end. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, and that's exactly that. This was actually the product of that as well. Just taking the steps and reach contacting Michael with the information that's there. So he's responsive. It is sort of a niche thing. So if you're finding this, it's definitely to the few, not the many, but very powerful for those few that do get in.
So before we go, I've got a question to ask you.
Please.
Out of the 50 minutes we spent with each other, what's your big takeaway, your big aha moment, first thing that comes to mind?
My big aha moment is I've definitely overlooked my languaging for myself. I think I've put a lot of focus on my prospective customers and sort of the words that they're saying and coaching people on how to be more efficient there. But I think instead of going so hard as to getting maybe other people to see things that I would like the way that I would like to see them, I've got to take a moment to really maybe assess and question those things that I don't even think about, those beliefs that I've got. It's like the only beliefs that we don't challenge are the ones we know to be true. And so when you say things about prospect compared to prospective customer or limiting beliefs and objections to just like concerns and things along the lines of that, that really, I mean, it still kind of shakes me now a little bit because I'm realizing, oh my God, there's a bit of that too focused on materialism, too focused on the deal. And right now in one of our accounts, and it's been a little bit crazy lately where it's like the numbers have been down just a touch. So there's a lot of internal stress. And it's exactly that, which is like, I don't think it makes sense to berate the team about not having hit their numbers, berating the team about we didn't help enough people. We didn't show up the way we needed to. We didn't give it enough, give it an all. And that little shift right there, I feel like is going to serve us a lot. And when you were given that tactic from your early mentor that was like, the technical people ask him, is that important? I'm really ready to go back to the team with like, how can we help more people and using that language instead and just seeing sort of where that takes us and just sort of seeing how everyone feels about that and coaching from that perspective as opposed to this is going to help you overcome objections. This will help you get over their questions and help them resolve concerns that they've got for your prospective buyers and just bringing that energy to it. Because I really feel like that is sort of the 10-degree shift that is going to make all the difference because I think the energy isn't where it needs to be right now. So that was my biggest takeaway.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, 100%. All right. I've absolutely, this has been incredible, Michael. We've reached out. I know I reached out to you late last year and it's been awesome having you on. And yeah, for anybody watching this, once again, it's naturalselling.com. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Anything else
Thanks,
to
Kevin.
add?
Take care.
Cheers.
Okay, bye.